This one on?
Depends if you want to be seen or if you want the screen to be seen.
Okay, so you try first to go down one more.
That's good. No, you spoiled it now.
You want it full black. Okay, so then you want one up. One of the one up. And then you get this set of lights. Okay.
It's better without the lights if you want it on the screen. Nice.
Anytime you're ready.
Okay. So with DS6, this is Nick and I'm Carl.
We're just running through a couple of things fairly briefly. We were hoping this might be a bit more of an interactive session actually, so we're going to whiz through this and then just open the floor for questions. So we'll start with who are we, just so you have an idea of our background, which I think most of you probably already do. So I myself have worked in practice for over 10 years now, building a number of projects at a variety of scales, from sort of, you know, the one-off house, the bespoke office, to a tiny glass house in Kew Gardens. But over the years, certainly the last sort of 8-9 years, I focused predominantly on infrastructure, and that's something that's quite core, I guess, to both what we're thinking and what we're exploring in practice. In fact, Carl and I, if we sort of click a little bit quicker, I think it probably was awesome. Well, okay, a number of projects, Heathrow, Crossrail, a bridge over the River Swan in Perth. I mean, you know, big infrastructure projects, and not just paper projects. Most of these are built and used by between 20 and 50 million people a year. So these are things that have a real impact in how cities and urban fabric work, and the infrastructure that allows networks and flows to enable connection throughout the world.
So before I jump in, this is where Nick and I really sort of met. We had some really interesting discussions and design development for Heathrow T2B. I ran the computational design unit at Grimshaw. Subsequently, in 2012, I set up my own consultancy company called Tectonic IP, and been involved in some pretty large-scale commercial projects with the likes of Brookfield developers, developing IP and early-stage design development for £1.5 billion projects alike. But again, yeah, sort of large-scale infrastructure projects. So really understanding what the requirements are of the client and developing a brief strategy, both in terms of research and development, but also actively taking those designs to fruition. Tectonic IP, generally, we encourage a lot of computational technology, analysis, and using that to drive the principles of design, but also using advanced sort of scanning technology, 3D printing. So this is Project Silkworm, which is an open source plugin for Rhino and Grasshopper for anyone who is interested in using it.
So why are we running DS6? And I guess the answer to that question stems from really a perception in a shift in industry, and that's something that both Carl and I have experienced firsthand and are very aware of. And that's really, you know, the breaking down of the divisions between disciplines enabled primarily by digital interfaces and parametric design and various other sort of tools. You know, for a long time, I mean, you know, the birth of British high tech in the 70s was about sitting around the table with your engineer from day one and saying, you know, questioning everything and seeing what was possible. And I think we're in a sort of renaissance of that, where actually, you know, boundaries are really starting to come down. Now that presents opportunities in terms of the industry and how it operates. It also presents problems in terms of legal frameworks. Who takes responsibility for what? You know, if your software tells you that something can stand up and your engineer tells you it can't, or how do you reconcile that?
So if we're looking at the industry, construction is quite unique. We take some analysis across some other industries. You can see on the left-hand side, the construction industry is disparate, and there's multiple stakeholders all interacting. And part of what an architect's role is, or how we see a role of the architect, is choreographing multiple disciplines, developing ideas, communicating and collaborating with these groups.
And that idea of choreography is really, really key, because you're now no longer necessarily the single author of certainly a big project like that. You know, there's unlikely to be one person with a pen, right? That's not really how it works. But what you have to do is orchestrate a whole team of specialists who are helping that design come to fruition. And it's through things like through building information modeling, through computational design, that process really could and should, perhaps, in our opinion, put the architect in the driving seat. And it's something that within the industry, I think, the profession's sort of fallen back slightly, and a lot of these projects are now engineering-led. And I think, well, why is that?
Yeah, the Latham report quoted there's about 80% of construction problems are due to missing information. So, as an architect, we're actually information architects. We're communicating this information across the disciplines. Traditionally, the industry works in a siloed approach. So each one of these stakeholders are working almost blind, restricted to their legal requirements and delivery protocols. And there's often wasting time, repeated work. So there's technology such as BIM and virtual design and construction, which encourages what we call a networked narrative. So this can go from anything of design exploration to conversation, but what is important and what is happening in the industry is a recognition that technology can help by bringing these stakeholders around a single source of truth, wrapped in a legal framework, and allow for sort of fluid and emergent design aspirations, at all times communicating with the stakeholders through that single source. So, what are we focused on? We're working. We see a real opportunity here, starting in education. You guys are coming into the industry fresh. What we can actually do, and this is a video from our studio trip in Tokyo, we can actually begin to disrupt the flows and choreograph. Fundamental to that is we recognise that you as an individual see the world very differently.
Or can only experience the world through your own perceptions. And again, that's a key theme which we'd like to explore further this year.
So we effectively see the user as a platform, or individual as a platform in itself.
So how do we do this? Essentially, we have an operative strategy which has been sort of developed throughout all of last year and refined now to a point where we think it's fairly robust. If we go to the next slide, essentially what we're talking about is a sort of an iterative process, but driven by a single direction with a starting point, leading to starting with an appreciation of your own perception and the senses that you use to perceive, embodying that in a wearable technology that the students or that you guys will develop, and then using that wearable technology which will record data, personal data to you, so it may well be your heartbeat or your galvanic skin response, or something very personal at the same time as recording something about your environment. And creating data sets that you can then analyse. And in analysing that, recognising and spotting opportunities that then allow you to formulate your own brief, your own urban agenda, your own interest that you want to explore.
yeah, to sort of build on that, we're not defining what your group's going to be. We're creating a framework for you guys to work and fluidly move within. So starting with senses. Finding ways to map those senses. And again, this isn't an individual response. When you're working on a site or you're working within a design studio, you're always working in a sort of collaborative way. So what would it mean if we could actually track that and develop sort of KPIs and understand exactly how people are working? So in a way, thinking about it as the architecture behind the architecture. Employing analysis techniques, and then looking at ways we can actually formulate through interactive workshops, live iteration. So instead of necessarily working towards one final deadline, we're very interested in quick iterations of design development.
So just to run you through very briefly a number of the projects from last year, just as examples of what all this might come to. The first project here up on the screen was really about subverting land value in Tokyo. So the studio field trip, as it was mentioned last year, was to Tokyo, and a key issue within the city centre is, land value is astronomically high. Now, there's a legal framework at the moment in Tokyo that typically, when you build a speculative development,